Okay, good evening everyone. My name is Bryan Irvine and I'll be the chairperson this evening. I've been involved with agri-environment schemes for many years and I'm currently the Senior Biodiversity Technologist at CAFRE, where our team has a role in providing EFS training. You're very welcome to this webinar on hedge planting and thank you very much for turning up so punctually. The event will be recorded and the link to the recording will be put onto the CAFRE website and CAFRE TV. You will have the opportunity to submit questions throughout the evening. Laptop users can submit questions using the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Hover your mouse at the bottom right. Mobile users can access the Q&A option via the three-dot icon, which appears when you tap your screen. Please select the All Panelists option when submitting your question and we will answer the questions at the end. A short survey, only 3 questions, will be available at the end of the event and we'd be grateful if you would complete these in order to give us an indication of how the event went or any queries you need us to follow up. We will have 2 presenters tonight, myself and Nicola Warden, who is also a CAFRE Biodiversity Technologist based at Greenmount. Nicola delivers habitat management to level 3 students at the college and delivers practical training in hedge planting to these students and other courses. Nicola will look at hedge planting practical tips for successful hedge establishment. Jerry McGurr from Countryside Management Delivery has kindly joined us this evening for the question session. Countryside Management Delivery are the branch who are responsible for running the scheme, and Jerry is one of their wisest men. In the first part of this webinar, I will specifically look at the hedge planting requirements within the EFS scheme, how to comply with the scheme, and claim correctly. Most of you attending this evening's webinar have been invited by letter, as you are an EFS Tranche 4 applicant with the hedge planting option. Hopefully, you will have received your agreement within the past few weeks and are getting prepared to commence your capital works. You will also receive a letter this week introducing you to online training. Nicola will explain later, but please do your training early before you start your work. A very important piece of information is that due to the ongoing pandemic, Tranche 4 participants now have until the 31st of December 2021 to complete the work applied for under the scheme. This gives you an extra 7 months to complete the agreed work. Whilst this is very welcome news with the current tragic weather, it can also lead to problems. The time frame available for hedge planting in winter is minimal, due to plants only being available from late November. So I strongly encourage you to start this spring so that you can claim accurately in this year's single application form. So more about that later. For those of you who are also hedge laying, this is important. You're going to get a second bite at your hedge laying in October 2021 because the way the weather has been, it's been very difficult to get this done to date, and obviously you need that done before the 1st of March. Okay, hedges are a fantastic resource on Northern Ireland farms, providing a very long list of ecosystem services both to the farm and to the community. The bulk of the world's thorn hedges are in the UK and Ireland. They are classed as a priority habitat, and they always need a bit of work, whether it's cutting management, laying, coppicing, or in this case, planting a new hedge, so we can maximise the shelter and biodiversity opportunities that hedges provide in Northern Ireland farms. So, thank you for investing your time and effort into establishing a new hedge, both for the future of your own farm, but also for the many benefits that it will bring the wider community. I hope you're going to enjoy it and get a great sense of satisfaction as you make a positive mark on the landscape. Some of you will be old hands and some of you will be new to hedge planting. But the aim of the event tonight is to provide you with a background on the basic skill and importantly ensure that you are compliant with the EFS scheme to maximise payments for your efforts. One of the most frustrating things for both the farmer and the department is where hard work is done and yet it is outside the specifications of a scheme. So let's start. Next slide, please, Nicola. Okay, so this is what we're going to cover tonight. It will be, I will look at an introduction, issues of non-compliance, what an inspector will check, and completion deadlines in the claim process. And then I'll hand over to Nicola, who will look at hedge planting practical advice. Okay, Nicola. So first of all, your option is planting new hedge, including 2 protective fences. So the key thing is it's a native species hedge with hedgerow trees. And it must be protected using 2 fences. Okay, why plant a hedge? I've mentioned already, biodiversity, landscape, shelter, very important. Where are you going to do it? Well, hawthorn tends to grow best on free draining soils, but we don't have those in every location. So do think about that. If an extra bit of soil is required to lift it up in wet conditions and make a small brew, that helps. Quite often there will have been a hedge previously on a site, maybe a decade or 2 ago, might have been removed in the early 80s. And certainly I've seen plenty of farms where the hedges were removed in the early 80s and replanted again in the 90s. Think about where new hedges go. How can they link existing hedges and other habitats to bits of woodland, to other hedges, because these really are wildlife corridors. Okay, where not, we are unable to fund where there is an existing stone wall or there is an existing hedge. And do think about your BPS commitments. There is no, you cannot coppice or remove a hedge to then plant a new hedge. That's a different issue. So this is only where there is no hedge at present or in gaps in existing hedge. Okay, next slide, please, Nicola. The specification. We will chat quite a bit about weed control this evening, so we strongly recommend that you use weed control. Nicola will look at that later on. We are planting at least 5 woody plants per metre, and we have a list of those. It's hawthorn, blackthorn, holly, guelder rose, so a list at the back of the information sheet. Now that is at least 5, and that is your minimum specification. We are looking for at least 8 native trees per 100 metres, and again at least. There's a list of what species the native trees would be, and I would encourage you strongly to have a 9th native tree in there, which would be 1 hawthorn left to grow into a flowering hawthorn tree. Number 4, protect the trees with tubular tree guards, greater than tubular or square tree guards greater than 1.2 metres long. And remember, these are minimum specifications, so if you want to at any point go beyond those specifications, we would encourage that. And trees need to be staked, and there is a minimum size of stake, and again, particularly in windy sites, you will want to go beyond that. Weed control, we mentioned again. Okay, next slide, please, Nicola. Okay, I want to talk to you about what goes wrong, and these are the common non-compliances we find, and this is key to you getting the most out of your scheme. So number 1, you can see in the top left is the tape measure, and this refers to over-declarations. Now, whenever you've applied for the scheme, you have applied in the summer of 2020. By the time you claim in 2021, in the summer of 2021, a year has gone past. You'll do this work this spring and possibly this winter coming. So getting the claim correctly to the 1 year ago what you applied for is very important. So quite often we find somebody applied for 100 metres, but then the practical realities on the ground where the strainers have to go, a bit of an existing hedge that is left up. In actual fact, only 90 metres or 80 metres is done that meets the whole specification. So it's not how long the fence is, it is how long the hedge planting and the fence is fully compliant. And this is very important because if some part is not done, so then there can be penalties applied, and it could be that the 50 metres that is done very well receives no payment because the extra portion that is claimed that is incorrect is disallowed, and then a penalty turns up and you can end up with no money. So it is critically important that you check your claim, you modify your claim, amend it so that only the amount completed that is to the full spec is claimed. Okay, the second photograph on the right, really this problem is fencing. So quite often there is an issue in that particular photograph. There is a good ranch fence on the left-hand side, and sensibly the claimant in this case put a new fence up on the field side, and the hedge was protected, but that is not what the specification here. The specification is for 2 new hedges and a fence. Sorry, 2 new fences and a hedge. Okay, the fence itself is important that it achieves a specification. We'll look at that later, but it's going to be woven wire, 3 strands of line wire, or 5 strands of line wire. There's a full specification written on the information sheet, and it's really important that you read that first before you erect the fence. The third photograph on the bottom left refers to the other common issue at inspection, and that is weed control and lack of maintenance after planting. So planting the hedge is quite easy, but there is a bit of work required to maintain the hedge and keep on top of the weed control. And we'll chat a wee bit about that later on. Those are the 3 main common compliances, non-compliances. Next slide, please, Nicola. I mentioned information sheets, so these are on the DERA website. You go onto the DERA website, you look for EFS on the right-hand side, and then you go through that wealth of information. And information sheets under the wider options. Each sheet is usually 2 or 3 pages long. It has a description and has good advice, and it also has the key requirements and controls that an inspector will look for. So it's critical that you read each one of these information sheets that is relevant to your farm. And for each farm, that will probably only be 2 or 3 of these sheets. Next slide, please, Nicola. So looking at these a little bit more carefully, this one is the requirements and control for planting a hedge and 2 new fences. And you can see number 1, complete all capital works. That is everything by the 1st of June in the first year of this agreement. So in this case, for tranche 4 applicants, that has been changed to the 31st of December 2021. Second point, each individual length of new hedge must be a minimum of 10 metres. So that's really important. It could be an existing gappy hedge where there is spaces of 30, 40 metres, maybe there's a 5 metre gap. So it's only gaps that are bigger than 10 metres which can form part of your claim. The third point there, PNH3C, is only where the option has been approved. So sometimes by the time you come to do this work, it's a year after you applied for it. You look around, you think, I could use that 100 metres of hedge planting somewhere more sensible, but at this stage we cannot change it. We can only pay grant in the field that has been approved. The fourth one down, you can see is again plant at least 5 from the hedge species list per metre. 5C is about the tree species list, 8 trees per 100 metres. And then over to the right-hand side of the screen, native trees at least 8 metres apart, protective fences to the specification, and 8C is protect each newly planted tree with a new 1.2 metre tubular or square tree guard. Next slide, please, Nicola. As well as that checklist, so that was the checklist that the inspector uses. So it's on the information sheet. It's quite sensible for you to check that yourself. As well as that, there's annual management requirements. So these are very important because quite often people will put a lot of hard work into erecting the 2 fences, planting the hedge, and then they will leave and not do the after maintenance. So it's really important that this is retained and managed for the duration of the agreement. The trees must not be cut back, only the hedge plants. The weeds have to be controlled, and really the more on top of the job you are at the beginning, the hedge will take care of itself. It's really that first year which is crucial. And finally there, number 5 is field records, and we'll come to that in a minute. The specification there is a few notes in there for the stock-proof fencing. This is really important. These are minimum specifications, and these specifications are actually lower than we might have used in the past. A few key points I will mention is that the overall height of the fence must be at least 1.2 metres from the ground to the top wire. The intermediate posts must be at least 1.83 metres long. The spacing between the posts is 3 metres of a maximum. Okay, so we are actually, ideally you'd be putting them 2.7 metres apart. So we do not want to see them wider than 3 metres. Strainers, strainers have to be set at a maximum width of 150 metres apart. In actual fact, it would be quite sensible to put strainers every 50 metres. So this is a minimum specification that you have to meet or exceed. Intermediate posts there, size of them is quite important, 75 mil top diameter. And we've already had some questions in this evening about the posts, and really, I suppose, because of recent issues with post deterioration in the last decade, posts now have to have a potential minimum of 15-year life, and we need some evidence of that on the invoice to show that. Okay, next one, Nicola. We mentioned records, which puts a lot of people off. There are templates on the website of records. You will find some training in the online training that you receive. But really, records are very simple. And we have an example here of what might happen: the date something was done, what you did, where it was done, and the length. So this could be in an A4 pro forma. You could keep a file. Quite frankly, I would often use a notebook that is in your pocket, and you basically have a section for EFS, and it can be date, field number 1, hedge planted, 200 metres planted, and that can literally be the record. Now, these are always required, and they are part of the audit procedure, and it is far simpler if you make the records there and then at the time. Next slide, please, Nicola. So making your claim, this is important because of the time delays in this whole procedure. So EFS claims are made as part of your SAF online claim, which you may be putting through in March, April, up to the 15th of May. They come pre-populated. Quite often people have been using form fillers, and quite often the question is, did you plant the hedge? Yes, I planted the hedge. That's really not enough, because at the application stage you put in 200 meters of hedge, so it's important that you go and measure exactly what you've done. Take out the gate, take out the 5 meters at the end you didn't do, take out the bit in the middle that only got wired but didn't get planted because it was an impossible bit of a stone. So amend the claim to the appropriate amount. Maybe it'll only be 180 meters. Now, sometimes you're filling that in March or April. You are still doing a bit of hedge work. This year, you may still be going back to that work in December 2021. So you can, there is the facility of the SAF 3 form, which is on the website, and this allows you to amend the claim you put in May. And people are getting more and more used to SAF 3s. We're now getting a lot of them through, and that's a great way of amending a claim. Okay, next slide, Nicola. I think, yes, I'm going to pass over to you at this stage, Nicola, and then we'll come back for questions on my part.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Tonight I'm going to cover the practical side of hedge planting and try and give you a few tips to help you out. So first of all, site preparation and when we're going to plant. So generally you will plant your bare root plants from November to March when they're in the dormant season. You're not going to plant into soil that is waterlogged or frozen. On occasions, the bare root plants won't be available to purchase until late November. So as Bryan said, it could be December before you could get plants later on in the year. So for example, if your planting site is flat and it's moist, you could plant up into April of any year, but you run the risk of hitting a dry spell and your plant's not getting enough water to establish. So earlier is better. Or if you're planting, say, into a raised soil brew or into dry land, into dry conditions, you could plant in February if it dried up a bit, or you might be best waiting to December, where the roots will have enough time to establish and get enough moisture, rather than planting in March and April, where again you run the risk of having to potentially water your plants, which wouldn't be ideal. If possible, if your site allows it, then glyphosate off, spray off your strip where you're going to plant your new hedge at least 3 weeks beforehand, just to kill off any grass or weeds. And then again, if your site allows it, get a digger in to prepare the site. Give your plants the best chance to establish. Get the digger in to remove any old stumps or roots, flip the grass over and leave the soil on top. And if you can, in this trench, you can add well-rotted manure below the soil, but your manure has to be well-rotted, or else the roots of your plants could burn. And in sites where the manure is well-rotted, your plants will take off whenever they hit the manure. And just to show you the picture there in the middle, that is a bare root hazel plant. So just to show you what the bare root plant looks like for anyone who is unaware. So what to plant then? The recommendation, as Bryan has said, is to plant 5 different native species in each 30-metre length of hedge, and it's recommended to plant on a 75% hawthorn to 25% other woody species mix. And the table on the right shows you the other species that are allowed through EFS. So by planting a diverse range, by not just planting hawthorn, by choosing other species to plant, we're allowing our hedge having other plants in there that are going to flower at different times of the year, and this will prolong the floral resource available, and we'll have pollen and nectar available throughout the season rather than just for a couple of weeks. So for our diversity and for the birds and bees and everything else, it's good to have that longer spell of flowers and pollen and nectar available, and then berries later on. So for EFS, the specification is you have to plant at least 5 plants per metre, but for a more stock-proof hedge, you'll want to plant 7 or 8 plants per metre just to make it thicker and denser. Quicks can be bought at different ages, so there'll be different sizes and therefore different price ranges. If you plan on planting and then abandoning the hedge, you'll want to plant bigger and more expensive quicks. And you may also want to plant more than 5 plants per metre to ensure you have 5 plants surviving later on or next year, or any time in your agreement. But if your conditions are good, the site is being prepared well, your weed control is in place, and you're going to visit the hedge and maintain it 2 or 3 times a year, you can go for younger and cheaper plants. So just to show you some more pictures here, this can be an example of 5 different species for your hedge. So going across from the left to the right, we have hawthorn, blackthorn, holly, guelder rose and hazel. So it's just showing you the pictures of each of them. At all times, you're going to want to prevent the roots of the plant from drying out. So whenever you get your plants home from the nursery, unless you're planting that day that you purchase them, you're going to want to heel them into sand or soil, as you can see on the picture on the right there. So just dig a hole and stick your bundle in and make sure all the roots are covered. And then again, when you take your bundles out of your sand pit or the soil, to take them to the planting site, make sure they're in a plastic bag so they don't dry out. Basically, if your plants, the roots dry out, they'll die on you. So with regards to our trees then, as Bryan has already said, you need to plant at least 8 trees per 100 metre length of hedge, and they need to be at least 8 metres apart. The table there shows you all the different species that are allowed through the EFS. My picture on the right there shows you the 1.2 metre square tree guard. As Bryan has said, that's a minimum. Other sizes of tree guards are available, so you can get a 1.6 metre or a 1.8 metre guard. Using a taller guard will help you in years to come. For the hedge cutter operator, he'll be able to easily identify the trees and not cut them when he's cutting the hedge. And also, if you maybe have deer in the area, a taller guard can be beneficial for that if they could reach over the fence, for example, or any grazing livestock. You'll see in that picture that we use bamboo canes. They are not ideal at all for this, for supporting the tree guard. The stakes that you also buy or can buy with the guards, they are skinny, and if you are planting on an exposed windy site, the stakes won't stick it. So we advise you to upgrade the stake to a stronger post, for example, a fencing post or a split fencing post, just to give the tree more support. As Bryan mentioned earlier about the hawthorn trees, they'll be able to provide great floral resource and berries during the year. Hawthorn, it isn't listed now on our table here, as you can see, but it would be good if you could leave a hawthorn quick, not pruned, as an additional 9th or 10th tree. So make sure you have your 8 trees per 100 metre to meet the specification, and then have an additional hawthorn quick and identify it, that you'll not cut it then in years to come with the hedge cutter, and leave it to grow up as a tree every so often throughout your hedge. So where are we going to order these things then? Ideally, if it was available, try and get local provenance plants, as they are best suited and adapted to our climate and our weather conditions, especially if you're planting on an exposed site. It would be good to get these. Now, if you're planning on planting from now to March, your chances are you're not going to get any local provenance. But if you are thinking of waiting till late November, December, there is a possibility you could get local provenance plants. So there's 2 nurseries in the south that they collect Irish provenance seeds, grow it in their nursery in Ireland, and then sell it to the public. They are Fermoy Nurseries and None So Hardy Nursery. So later on in the year, you can put your order into them and ask for local provenance stuff, local provenance plants. But as I said, at this stage, if you're wanting to plant now, at this stage in the planting season, it is going to be European stock. So my best advice to you is to go to your local nursery, give them a ring, get your plants ordered as soon as possible. And even if you're not planning on planting for a month, get them home and heel them into sand or soil and just have them there ready to go, because in a month's time, you don't know what the story might be. You could have to wait a couple of weeks to get your plants ordered in, or you wouldn't know what could happen. So go and get your plants and have them at your farm ready to plant whenever the weather picks up, or it suits you to do it around other jobs. For the guards, ask your local nursery whenever you're getting your plants. They might be able to supply the correct guards for you. Other than that, you can try online, but you'll need to shop around. At the minute, there just seems to be a big difference in delivery charges, especially if they're coming from mainland UK. But for any guard you're buying, make sure it meets the specification. And you can't use a spiral guard for the EFS. It has to be at least a 1.2 metre tubular or square guard. And remember that you can go bigger, go longer than 1.2 metres. So then for our planting, the diagram on the left shows you roughly where your plants will go. So depending on the number of plants you're wishing to plant per metre, the planting distance will obviously vary. It's recommended that you plant in a double staggered row. So if you're going to plant 7 or 8 plants per metre, it's approximately a welly boot length, so about 300 mil or a foot between the rows, and then the same between the plants within the rows. The photo in the middle, kindly given to us by Paul O'Hagan for us to use tonight, shows you he has made up a jig. Great idea, especially if you're doing long lengths of hedge. It will keep your plants the right distance apart, keep your hedge straight if you run a line up it as well. And it'll mean that you're not left with a bundle of quicks at the end that you haven't managed to get your 7 or 8 plants per metre. So definitely if you're doing a long length of hedge, make yourself up a jig. It doesn't have to be too fancy or anything. It will just keep everything in order. Then just to show you the photo on the right, you can see this is just a hawthorn quick that I've taken a close-up picture. So you can see if you follow the mouse down the pointer, so it's green and then it changes to yellow and then brown. So where it changes from the green to the yellow is called the root colour. Basically anything from yellow down was in the soil in the nursery, and green and up was above the soil. So when you're planting, you will want to plant back in to the same depth that it came out of the soil. So you want to get to where it changes from green to yellow. That's where you want the soil level to be. And whenever you're planting, make sure all the roots are below the soil surface and hidden underneath the soil. So once you get your plant in at the right depth, you will want to heel the plant in just with the heel of your foot and make sure it's good and firm and there's no air pockets. If there are air pockets, the roots could dry out and die. The wind could push the plant about and then loosen it and help or cause the plant to dry out as well. Or water could get in and then freeze if the weather was to turn bad. And as I said earlier about using the mixture of species, whenever you are planting your hedge and if you're using a mixture, try and get that mixture throughout the whole length of hedge. So and try and not forget about a specific species. So don't plant 10 metres of hedge and then think, oh, I better plant some blackthorn here and then plant 4 metres of blackthorn. Try and throughout the whole hedge plant a mixture, so we have that diversity the whole length of our hedge. So then once we plant, it is recommended to prune all of your plants except the holly and the trees, and to cut them just the secateurs and leave them into a point. So why are we going to prune? Essentially, the plants that we have planted are all trees. So by pruning them, we are changing them from a tree to a bush. And where the cut was made, there will be 3 or 4 new stems will grow from that cut. So basically, we're going to cut all the plants that we don't want to become a tree. And as I said about leaving that additional hawthorn quick unpruned and marking it out as a potential tree. So how low do we cut? That'll depend on a few things. Basically, the lower you cut, the better. The branching will start lower and you will have a denser hedge at ground level. But the lower you cut, the weed control will need to be better, just to give your plants the best chance at survival. And again, if your conditions are bad, if there's no weed control, it's advisable that you don't prune your plants, as the grass and the weeds will outcompete them. And there you can just see some of the pictures of our plants pruned, and our tree guards up and our weed control on. So moving on to weed control, you can see different options here. So the first one on the left is it's Mypex weed control fabric. So it's a woven plastic material. You can get it in a 1 metre wide and a 1.5 metre wide, and you can see the prices there per metre. The middle one then is a roll of black plastic, and you can see the price there, and it comes in a 1 metre wide roll as well. Then on the right, we planted a bit of hedge at Greenmount before Christmas with a group of students, and we used waste silo black plastic just off the farm. I got the farm staff to cut me, it was 1.5 metre wide or 5 foot wide strips of waste silo cover, and we used that as our weed control, and it worked very well. And we have that advantage then that it is wider than the roll that you would buy, and the cost, you've already incurred that cost for buying it for your silo, so you're recycling the cover and using it for your weed control in your new hedge. As you can see there in the middle photo, the person on the left is pushing the spade down in the side of the plastic. So essentially we tucked in the plastic, just put the spade and just put the spade on the side of the plastic and push down. So you think it would rip the plastic, but it doesn't. And it keeps the plastic, and you can use it for the Mypex as well. It keeps the weed control down in nice and secure. If there's 2 of you planting the hedge, it would be ideal for the 2 of you to go along either side of the plastic and tuck down at the same time at the same bit of plastic, just to keep it neater and tighter. Works well. And also, instead of using a spade, you can use a garden hoe if your conditions are muddy and sticky. The garden hoe just works as well. And then if you have any excess stones that you've pulled out of the planting site, just throw them on top of the plastic as well, and it will help keep it down. If you're not going to tuck it down in and you want to put quarry dust on top, or just stones or gravel, the width of the rolls in the left and the middle photo works fine, because you're not losing any of that width from tucking in. But whenever you tuck in, you lose some of that width. So the rolls become too narrow for weed control. So that is the advantage of cutting the wider strips off our silo cover. We are getting that extra weed control, and you'll see later in photos just how useful that extra width would be. These are just some more photos then. The middle one and the right photo shows you the gravel just being put on the weed control as well. And the gravel works, but the weeds can still grow in the gravel. There'll be enough moisture and whatever else in the gravel for the weeds to grow. So the tucking in worked very well. and you're not putting all that extra cost off the quarry dust. And then our fencing, as Bryan has mentioned, the specifications. So you'll want to read your information sheet and make sure the fence meets the required specification. If you've rabbits or hares in your area, you're going to want to get the likes of chicken wire up along your hedge as soon as possible, and make sure you have the guards on your trees. The hares and the rabbits will just come along and strip the bark and nibble away at your nice wee plants, and that could stunt their growth. So just to show you some photos now of why we do weed control. So this hedge was planted in January 2020 with a group of students, and then these photos were taken in June 2020. So this particular area, it is quite fertile, and as you can see, the weeds have grown well from January to June. So Bryan and I, whenever we went back in June, as you can see, we basically went up both sides of the hedge and tramped down the long grasses on both sides. We didn't cut or didn't pull the grasses out, we just tramped them down and stomped on them basically. So when the long grass is tramped down, it will stay down for a couple of months, and that basically gives your hedge the best chance at getting all the nutrients, water and sunlight during its first growing season in that summer. So you're going to want to do this ideally 2 or 3 times in the first year, just to maximise the light and everything getting to your new hedge, just so it can grow away in its first growing season. We then revisited this hedge. So we done it in June and revisited again in September. So ideally you'd maybe want to get in about May, and then say go again in July and maybe August during the growing season. So it's critical that you look after your young hedge and go along either side, tramp down the grasses, and then also hand pull any of the weeds that might be growing up out of the holes which you made for the plants to come up out through. You've put the effort in to plant your hedge, so you may as well look after it and help it to have the best start. And the more effort you put in the first year or two, until it gets well established, it'll pay off then in the long run. So you can see where the plastic and the Mypex fabric has been put down, and the weed controls work very well where they are down. But if, say for example, we had that wider silo cover along this hedge, there would be less area for the grass and weeds to grow, and we would have a wider weed-free area, which would be very beneficial. So you can see how that wider plastic could be useful here. Just to note, the long grass along the side, it actually hasn't done any harm to your plants. It's actually acted like a mini greenhouse for our plants, and it's given them shelter in those first couple of winter months. So it does do good, but comes a point you have to get in and tramp them down and to let that light and water and nutrients into our hedging plants. So roughly it took Bryan and I about 20 minutes per 100 metre to tramp up along both sides, and then depending on the amount of weeds that has come up through any holes in your plastic, probably took about another roughly 10 to 20 minutes per 100 metres of the hedge. So this is a photo again from Paul O'Hagan, just a great example of what growth can be achieved after year 1. If the site is well prepared with good wide weed control, and you can see there it's been tucked in along the sides. So if you do your work well at the start, prepare your site, put down good wide weed control, it'll make your job easier. You might only have to look after it for the first year or second year, and compared to a hedge that might be slow growing, it could take 3 years of maintenance. So that just shows you the growth. I'm now going to show you a video, so just bear with me here while I get this up.
The aim of this training is to provide guidance on planting new hedgerows, including 2 protective fences for the environmental farming scheme. Plant the hedge between November and March, but not when the soil is waterlogged or frozen. Select plants with a good fibrous root system. When planting, plant to the depth of the root collar. If there's a delay between purchasing the plants and planting, heel the bundles into moist soil. While you can use one native species, it is preferable to use a mix of species. We will plant 6 different species. From the left, hawthorn, blackthorn, dog rose, hazel, guelder rose and holly. During the planting, it is important to keep the roots moist. Plant at least 5 woody plants per metre length. 7 to 8 plants per metre will give a more stock-proof hedge. It is recommended to plant a double staggered row. Good aftercare is important to ensure successful establishment. Weed control is a big challenge. One way to control weeds is to use mulches, for example, black fabric sheet. First, use secateurs to cut back the hedge plants, but not holly, to within 5 to 6 inches of the ground. Then push the black fabric over the top of the cut stumps. Weigh down the fabric with some loose gravel. The mulch will control the weeds in the centre of the hedge. However, you will have to control the weeds on both sides of the mulch for a few years to ensure successful establishment. The cut plants will soon sprout. We must also plant 8 native trees every 100 metres of hedge. The trees must be at least 8 metres apart. Each newly planted tree must be protected with a 1.2 metre tubular tree guard and stake. Finally, all newly planted hedgerows must have 2 protective fences. Fencing is galvanised woven wire and 3 strands line wire, or 5 strands line wire.
Okay, so that was just a video done by my colleague Terence Henry, just to show you a bit more of hedge planting. So just to let you know, there are other videos and resources out there available for you to go and watch, learn more, see different planting techniques, but just be aware that whatever video you watch, if it's not to do with DAERA and the environmental farming scheme, you can more than likely disregard that specification. Make sure the hedge that you plant meets the EFS specification. So just to quickly run through, Brian mentioned earlier about the CAFRE online training, and you will be getting a letter about this in the next couple of days. So and it will have information about how to access it as well. So just to show you, you'll go onto Google, type in www.cafre.ac.uk, and then this will be your home screen that you'll see. Then up in the top right corner, where I've highlighted in the red box where it says Student Portal CAFRE Online, if you click on that, it will take you to this here login screen then. Your username will be your 6-digit business ID, which usually starts with a 6. Your password, for the purposes of getting you logged on, it's default to password with a capital P, and then followed by XXX, but your XXX will be the last 3 digits of your postcode. So for example, the postcode of BT41 4PS will be password with a capital P for capital P, capital S. So make sure you use your capital letters. And then whenever you log in for the first time, you'll be prompted to change your password to something more secure of your own. So make sure you remember that new password, and in case you ever need to go back on to your CAFRE Online to complete more training. And then click the login button there as well. So once you go in to your CAFRE Online, to your account, this is known as your dashboard, what you're seeing here now, and it will have these here coloured boxes displaying each of the modules that you've been put onto, which represent the EFS options that you have in your agreement. If they don't show, you can see their courses, which I've highlighted with the red box. If your coloured boxes down below aren't showing, click on courses and they should come up. These here coloured boxes should appear. So each one of the coloured boxes, as I just said, it represents one of the modules that you've been entered onto. So for example, if we click onto our Planting New Hedgerows module, it'll come up with your lesson and your information sheet. In the lesson then, it will take you to the video. You must watch the video and then answer 4 questions which link back to the video and what you've just learnt in your training video. And then you can read the information sheet, and then you need to register your training as complete. So once you've watched the video, answer the 4 questions, you'll get this screen. You need to remember to click on the blue box that you can see there. If you don't click on the blue box, your video, it won't have registered that you've done your training, so you'll not appear on our side as complete. Then after you click on the blue box, you'll see this here, congratulations, end of lesson reached. Then if you click on the CAFRE Online up in the top left hand corner there, that will take you back to your dashboard. Once you've completed all the modules that you've been assigned to, so once each of your modules, each of your EFS options, once you've done a training module on each of them, it'll appear like this. Each of your modules will say that they've been 100% complete, and you will have the same number of badges over on the right hand side. So they'll look something like that. So say you have 4 modules to begin with, you need to have 4 badges at the end, and then your training will be complete, and on our end we will know that you've completed it. You have till the end of December, so the 31st of December 2021 to complete this training, but we advise that you go on and do it before you do any of your field work. They explain the EFS specification, gives you a chance to read the information sheet as well, so you'll know what you're doing whenever it comes to planting your hedge and whatever other options you have on your agreement. So that was just a quick show of your online training.
Thank you very much, Nicola and Jerry, and I'm going to wrap this up and just remind you of 5 key points before you go. Make sure you get a copy of the EFS specification before you do the work. Understand the timescales. Plant between now and April, but the earlier the better, and then you can also plant again in December coming. Measure and claim accurately. That is the key. Do your own records, and lastly, enjoy it and take pride in your work. And once these restrictions are over, come on a hedging course next winter. We'll run planting and laying courses for you. Look forward to seeing you there. Once we finish this event, please don't just shut your screen down, but wait for the host to finish the call and then answer the 3 short survey questions, please. We do value your feedback. And thank you very much once again for attending. Good evening.